when we look at farm performance, it's in the context of how we care for the stock on farm in order to achieve that. Some of our KPIs orientated around animal wellbeing are healthy cows. Now, healthy cows to us means around 15% involuntary culls. So what we try and target is 10% empty and 5% involuntary. So that involuntary could be due to, deaths or lameness or somatic or conformation issues or stuff like that. So that works out about, around 61 odd cows. And so far this season, we've had about 16.7%. So we haven't achieved our 15% sort of involuntary culls. The reason that this one's really important is that we have a goal of a 21% replacement rate. So we need that 6% choice to apply genetic pressure to get the right cow who's going to perform within our system. Now, one of the other KPIs that we have around there in healthy cows is about their welfare needs being met. And some of the key ways we do this is regular body condition scoring, and that's individual cows. We do that about 4 to 6 times a year, depending on how we're going to use the data. We also do an annual tail audit, so that's prior to calving and after the peak milk period. We also have heat stress mitigation strategies in place. So any of you that have been following us, and we're at our last field day, we talked quite a lot about respiration rates. We talked about the sprinklers and access to shade, milking frequency options, and how we were setting up our crops. And then we also look at managing lameness and mastitis. The other key area we've got is around our purposeful lives for calves, and this one came through from our wider community who said we want to reduce the amount of bobbies. This year we had a 31% reduction in bobbies due to our sex semen Wagon program, and we've done heifer synchrony this year, and we will hope to continue to keep reducing that. And the last one there is the healthy calves. And healthy calves for us at the moment, we're testing total blood protein. And we had 4 out of the 5 came in within that good level, which means that they are getting adequate supplies of good quality colostrum to get them off and started for the year. So we'll test again for that. That just gives us an indication about whether we need to deconstruct that early part of calf rearing. And at this stage, we've got no cause for concern with those calves. So I'm just going to get Tom to talk through a little bit about some of these key areas under animal wellbeing.
A few years ago we made the decision to build a bit of a model alongside the vets and use body condition score and calving dates to create a drying off plan. So we've been monitoring condition score throughout the year. We've pushed out to about 6 weeks apart this year, and I think we'll go back to monthly monitoring next year, just to keep a closer eye on it. The cows, we obviously overshot the mark again with the awesome quality grass going into winter last year, so they could just continue putting on weight. By late May, we were off all supplements and just feeding grass, and they just continued piling on the pounds. So we topped out at 5.7, I think. So really high. So we've, as I said before, we've mined that to put it back into the vat. We've continued. The problem we've found, which I'll touch on in a bit, I'll give that bit away. We've bottomed out higher than every year, but we've obviously started so much higher. So I didn't find any extra issues with metabolics in the spring. So I think we've just used a lot of fibre to keep the cows full and squeeze them back a bit. Lameness, a couple of years ago we had serious issues, so we spent a bit of money last autumn on redoing the races, and we've done our second hit at that just last week. Not quite happy with the surface that's come up with, but we're just going to hopefully get a bit of rain on it and try and soften that top surface and give it another roll and try and crush a few of those small stones on the surface. But we've had a really good result. Only 13% of the cows getting lame versus 32 in that bad year. So we also worked a lot with Bill from Cambridge Vets, who's our healthy hoof provider. We looked at how we manage the cows on the yard and how they managed on the races. We found this year, just with doing the the stretcher race that we did do, we were able to leave the cows to walk along them on their own. There was no need to push them, and that just allowed us to go off and put up a fence or wind up a fence without having to hurry the cows up. So really good result. Cell count has been a lot better this year. Just working really hard on analysing who are the repeat offenders and culling cows that have staph infections. Each herd test will take the top 20 cell count cows and get them cultured. We're working towards a drying off plan on how much dry cow we use, and everything will obviously get teat seal as they have been for the last few years. Mastitis cases have been an issue, sudden rise, just getting these catchy showers while it's still been warm, a lot of flies around on the crops. So that's jumped up our numbers the last couple of months really. Any questions on animal health before we move on to mating? Yep.
Do you want to talk? Just go back to that one. Culling cows?
I did say that.
Did you? In November?
So, so I picked out some staph cows from the November herd test, so they went pre-Christmas. They were the staph cows, repeat offenders from the previous years, and also quite old as well. So fitted to get rid of those early on.
So wanting to be able to have more pressure on selecting for somatic cell count in order to make sure we are achieving best quality milk going forward for future years as well. Yep. Okay, so the other part of the animal wellbeing that also fits with the farm performance is our reproductive results. So this is our fertility focus report. This is one area that we didn't do very well at this year. Everybody has access to a fertility focus report. You get it off Minder, it looks like this. A couple of things to note is... Come up here, sorry Tom. Yep. Okay, so 6-week in calf rate, we only achieved 65%. So the last couple of years, we'd been sitting around 74%. We had a 65 the year prior. So we're pretty gutted with that. Understandably, our not-in-calf rate was about 14%, and that range 12 to 14% represents cows that left the farm prior to December, I think it was, that are assumed to be not-in-calf, even though they potentially could have been. So we started to think, well, what does this mean to us? How do we deconstruct this and find out a little bit more? We can see the drivers of our 6-week in calf rate is the 3-week submission rate and the conception rate. So were we picking the right cows? We achieved about 88%. We're aiming above 90%. We can feel pretty confident that the submission rate was fine. It wasn't the limitation. What was really interesting was our conception rate. 47% versus that target of 60%. So we needed to delve a little bit deeper and understand what was happening here. This is our 6-week in calf rate for this season. This is the dark blue line. It's in your handout, page 28, versus the year prior. So remember the year prior we hit about 74%. At 6 weeks this year, this is what happened. 2 significant things I wanted to show you that we'll talk a little bit further about. This period here, weeks 3 to week 6, was the last couple of weeks of October, that sort of mid-October through to the early November period. And this here, big jump up here at about week kind of 10, 11. And of course we carried on mating a bit longer because all of a sudden we had all these cows coming back up again. So 2 quite significant things that were happening with this graph. Now remember that we brought our mating forward a week because the year prior when we were looking at the sex semen we had to bring it back to wait for the sex semen to be available. This year we decided we'd pull it forward a week again, and that of course has an impact on 6-week in calf rate too. One of the key things we looked at, the easy answer to go, oh, it happened to everybody, it was a Waikato issue, and you know, the vets often will, when you start talking to them, you go, how are the PD results going? Is there a problem this year or not? So we thought, let's actually have a look at the data. And no, it was just us. So this was us last year. I know, we're pretty gutted when we saw that. So it's really interesting. So the average was actually, this is the Cambridge Vet Clinic set of data. So there's only about 46 farms in there. So probably you wouldn't call it a huge significant pool of data, but it gives us a bit of context. The average didn't change, but what was interesting is that we were up in that top quartile here, and then this year we very much sort of bottom third. But what was quite interesting is that these guys who were doing really, really well, all of a sudden there weren't many guys who were doing really, really well. But then a few guys that had a bit of a hard time that year actually did better. So there was a real shift. And I think when you talk to most people, some people say, yep, had a great 6 week, others say, oh no, it was pretty crap. So let's just say it wasn't everybody in the Waikato that had this problem, it was still a bit of a farm issue. So what we did, just like anybody else would do, is we said, right, let's get our team around us and find out more about this. So we brought in Neville and Jair from LIC, and we also brought in Bill from Cambridge Vets to actually talk about what was happening. And I'm going to get Jair to come up and just talk about all the things that we looked at and where we found there was no relationship, and then we'll start to talk about what we thought was contributing.
Thank you. Good morning, team. So, as you said, we were called upon. Well, we always review the performance, really. It's just the time this year was slightly different because we've been maintaining a really high reproductive performance, but this year went backwards a little bit. And as Joe pointed out, whenever you shift mating forward by a week, you expect to lose about a 2% 6 week in calf rate anyway, because inadvertently, as you can see on page, that is 29 with the FFR, you can see that the calving pattern of the herd, because the mating start date was brought forward, it looks worse than it would have been if you had kept mating at the same time. So that's always a factor. When cows calve, it's always a factor in it. But the concept that we go through when we are reviewing the performances, we follow the principles of in-calf. We use the 8 pieces of the cake to try and use the information that we have, which we have a wealth of here at our farm, to try and rule things in and out. So as you can see here, the heat detection itself is one of the ingredients. All very well to have cows cycling, are we able to pick them up and pick them up well? So for herds that do long or all AB, extended period of AB, it's common to have a higher than target proportion of cows that have returned to have long returns. But from the short returns part of the graph, it looks like we're doing a pretty good job at our farm. When we look at conception rate, so we thought about lots of things. We looked at, because our farm uses sexed semen and Wagyu and conventional semen, we looked at those numbers to see if there was anything that jumped at us, and we didn't find that. We did find that conception rates maintained themselves between the first 3 weeks and the second 3 weeks, and overall it was around a 47% conception rate. In general, the data, if you look at the national data, you'll find that in general, the first 3 weeks of mating tend to have higher conception rates than the rest. And the indications were all there for us. Submission rates were good. We intervened with less cows. We had less non-cycling cows coming into mating. But once we hit mating, something happened there that affected the ability of cows getting pregnant. And as is pointed out in the handout there was a milk pregnancy testing done early in the piece, and we're expecting to have 50% of the cows pregnant by the end of 3 weeks, and it turned out that didn't happen. So we're thinking that there was also a little bit of embryo loss there. As far as, I guess, anything that we look at when we think about, say, the likes of AB practices, if there was a problem there or not, the way we like to look at this is look at different calving groups or different age groups and look for the big differences in conception rates. And we see that depending on when the cows calved, they had different levels of conception rates. So if the cow was good to get pregnant, she got pregnant better. If she wasn't, then she didn't. What else did we look at there?
So, Jair, we then started to say, well, let's look at any at-risk groups. So there was an age group that was a big contributor, and then we also started to look at body condition score, didn't we, Jair?
Yes, we did. We tried to, so we have the ability to drag the data and try and chuck it into spreadsheets and do all sorts of analysis. And unfortunately, we didn't find any clear relationships. And the body condition score side of things, we did find that the 2-year-olds, as was mentioned earlier on, we're a group that dropped performance significantly from last year, from 81% 6-week in calf rate to 67. And that represents 20% of the herd. When you have 20% of the herd that drops reproductive performance that much, the overall herd performance will weigh in. You add that to an extra week of mating and a little bit of what you're going to cover around the nutrition side of things, then we, despite not being able to really point the finger at anything very obvious, we can have a good indication of where things are kind of, were affected.
Cool. Thanks, Jaya.
That's right.
So then we started to deconstruct. So Tom, you jump up there. You can do this next bit.
So yeah, looking back on how the 2018, so that heifers that came home last autumn performed, we know that they struggled through last year's drought, so they were all above target at the February weigh, and then when we went down there to tag and bolus them in mid-April, they'd actually gone backwards and lost weight. So we pulled them out of the grazing block and brought them home, and we put them on a palm kernel silage and a bit of pasture diet and increase the pasture. So we're actually able to increase their weights closer to target. We got them from 416 up to 455, and yeah, that's 52% underweight down to only 29%. So it's still underweight, but we were able to get some condition on them so that they could start their milking careers off well. But what we think has happened, we put the weight on, but we haven't hit that skeletal growth that they needed long term. I don't think they stand out in the herd as small cows, but I think that's applied a lot of pressure to their performance.
And as a group, they were calving down at about 5.9. They were well over the 5.5 target, and they continued to lose weight to get down to about 4.7, I think. So they lost about 1.2 condition score. So it's recommended that it's between about 0.75 to 1 max. So they did lose a lot of weight, and they were actually performing really well. So we didn't put as many on once a day, did we, Tom?
No.
We didn't have the pressure in the system to put them on once a day like we have on previous years. So they just continue to keep milking really well through that period.
Yep. So yeah, as I alluded to earlier, that cows' milk production peaked higher and longer than the previous season, but we saw this significant drop mid to late October and into the beginning of November. Then we seemed to just level off a little bit. This coincided with our pasture covers going up from just over 2,000 up to 2,400, or closer to 2,500. We had put on we bought our late spring nitrogen and potassium on, and yeah, that coincided with plenty of rain, so the farm just went nuts. And yeah, I'm still seeing some stalk out there now that cows haven't eaten because of that sudden growth in a very short period. So we weren't able to capture enough of it as silage, and the cows, yeah, they dropped 2.1 down to 1.7 in that short period of time.
And this is weeks 3 to 6 of mating that
so,
this was
yeah,
happening for us. Yeah.
I think that did have an impact on our mating performance as well. Yeah, condition score again, just how that has gone through the season, starting up real high, and it's definitely plateaued, and Peter will be back in a fortnight's time to give us our latest results so that we can plan our dry off.
So it's quite interesting, Tom, because if we hadn't done the milk PD, we wouldn't have known that we had 50% of our cows and calf at 3 weeks. We had assumed that mating was going really, really well, and everything would indicate that we were on target to hit around that sort of early 70s for our 6-week in calf rate. So it's only because we had that data point, and now we look at the actual result, which was 42% that were actually in calf at 3 weeks. So the key thing is, what did we learn from that, and what are we going to do differently for next season, Tom?
As I said before, we'll just use that dry off plan based on current condition score and calving date. We'll do some bloods in autumn, in the spring to monitor mineral levels in the cows, and we'll also monitor signs of ketosis heading into mating and during mating. And our mating strategy using the sack semen, conventional semen and Wagon will stay the same.
There's a couple of bits of information that was missing for us. One is, when did they reach their lowest point in body condition score? Because we don't weigh the cows every day, we didn't actually know at what point they bottomed out and which point they were then starting to put weight on. So we'll probably look at doing an extra body condition score to get that piece of data. And the other one that we are doing is we are taking better control of our young stock that are coming through, so that we don't get this issue with some of the sort of the highs and lows with the young stock growth, particularly when they're hitting puberty and also for that later period of growth. Working with our grazier to ensure that those girls are on target. So that's pretty much where we're heading to for next year in relation to the repro. So the rest of the system sort of remains unchanged. We don't think we will do a milk PD again, do we, Tom?
Not at that time. Potentially, if we have an extended milking season, we're herd testing tomorrow morning. So I think it would be quite useful to catch any cows that have lost their fetus since the February scan. So I think we did it a couple of years ago, and it was really useful. And we managed to pick up 13 cows that had dropped their pregnancy, and so we would have assumed that they were in calf, and we would have ended up carrying them through winter because I hadn't seen them bulling at all. So.
Yep. So same cost, I think it was $2.99 per cow, same as pretty much a manual PD. So we just thought, can we spend our dollar differently to give us information, and then in order to actually affect some change. So that's our repro results. Has anyone got any questions or want to share their experience, Mark?
Was there any work done with the correlation of the ambient temperature? So, sort of drying we had an earlier spring, so to speak, and then I know you were looking at breeding.
Yeah.
Did we look at that? Because maybe it was 1%.
No, we haven't looked at that one, sorry. No. So the stressed environment, that the cow was potentially under stress during those, yep. In October, yeah. No, haven't looked at it, sorry.
Yeah,
Peter.
It does impact, and the real accurate data for the temperature humidity index shows that we hit a risk period most December, January time for losing pregnancy.
Which could be a little bit later than that potential period that we're thinking of, but there was a lot of environmental things happening at that time for us, yeah. Yeah, yep.
Yep. Yeah, so we did a synchro program with the new grazier this year on them, so but we weren't able to date scan them. So they'll be due just before the end of June.
How about cedar cows? Did you do any of them? Because we had that's where we dropped. That's where when we looked at the data, like you guys are right now as well. That's where we found where we lost 4% because I tried to do an early scan because I was worried that all of these cedars weren't coming back.
Yep.
And they never all get in calf, so I asked for a scan, but I'm only a low order share milker. And that scan didn't get done, and then we looked at the data later on, and it was obvious that we had good result. Half of them got in calves, which is pretty good for us. But then the other half, literally none of them got back on heat. I think the first, it was really poor.
Yep.
So we had this flat line, and then it went up again after sort of 4 or 5 weeks.
Yep.
And that's where we lost our 5% that we should have had. So maybe... I don't know if you've done any cedars, but
so we reduced our cedar numbers from 11% down to 6% this year. So there was less. Cows were cycling really well before mating, so it was looking really promising. And we mated them all, and then there was like you say, there was that gap of not a lot of matings, and then they all started coming back, and that's why I carried on for 13 weeks because it's. Yes, the cow's going to be calving later, but at least she's not a cull because she's empty, so she's at least attracting some value.
So next year, of course, we are calving earlier. The September calving cows are all up for sale pretty much this year, so we're still managing to have a fairly condensed calving next year, particularly with the heifers coming through, etc. So in the big picture of things, It's not ideal, but it's not a disaster. But we do need to think about what have we learnt from that, what can we do differently as we move forward. Malcolm?
I also understand that the comparisons that are done when the LIC do their calculations, they only do it with the herds that have dated pregnancies. And when you see how many do it, there's a hell of a lot of farmers don't do it.
Yeah, I was really surprised.
So I think that's a bit concerning, and so it'd be interesting to see just how the calving actually progresses out by the end of the year when the calving dates go in. But I understand there's only a bit over 1,000 cows in the main area that are dated so far this year. Right. So therefore, if that's the figures from the dated herds, which are generally the farmers that are more proactive, one wonders just what's happening generally in the industry. But perhaps LIC might like to comment.
Yeah, I can comment on that. Yeah. I'll borrow the microphone for that. So yes, we only report on 6-week in-calf rate and conception rates, and not in-calf rates from people that fit the profile or they have the detailed enough data to produce a detailed fertility focus report. So for some perspective, so that in the Waikato area, and I'm just rattling numbers from my head, in 2019 there were 1,100 herds. There was about, I think, 400,000 cows worth of data in it. Nationally, there's about 2.4 million cows that were in 2019 that were part of this data. So it's quite a lot bigger than that. I don't know where our discrepancies are at there, mate, but at this year so far, we already have around 4,100 herds that nationally have the data. We're looking at, from an LIC point of view, because we report on the herds that on farms that are clients of LIC and produce a detailed fertility focus report. So the data set is about 7,900 herds, so it's about over half of the herds that record with us that we can produce a report from have enough good enough information for us to look at. So last year was about 2.4 million cows. But the other thing to think about is when we're looking at calving rates of the herds that do not have a detailed fertility focus report, they follow similar trends in terms of improving or not dropping away significantly compared to everybody else. So I would suggest that despite the fact that it may be a little bit heavier towards people that are really driven by data, that is a pretty fair representation of what happens in New Zealand overall anyway. Okay?